Welcome to BookCast FM, bringing books to life one cast at a time.
We're doing a deep dive today.
That's right.
And it's a deep dive into The Art of War.
By Sun Tzu.
Yeah, Sun Tzu's Art of War, a book that has been, it's a classic. I mean, I think almost everybody has at least heard of it.
Oh, for sure.
But have you read it?
I have read it, yes.
Have you read the whole thing?
I have, yes.
Okay, cool.
It's a fascinating read.
It is. And, it's one of those that a lot of people will say, oh, I've read the first couple chapters, or I've read, the Cliff Notes or whatever. But we're going to go through the whole thing. We're going to go through all 13 chapters today. We're going to talk about all the main concepts.
Yeah, we're going to get into it.
Yeah.
Because, it's one of those books that is so influential that I think it's really important to actually go through all of it and to see the connections between all of the different ideas that Sun Tzu's talking about.
Yeah. And, he's got some amazing quotes in here, too. Oh, tons of them, yeah.
So, a lot of people will recognize some of the quotes, but might not know where they come from or what the context is.
Right.
And so, we're gonna give you that.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting because this book, obviously it's about war.
Yeah.
It's a military treatise.
On its surface.
Right. But it's amazing how so much of it is applicable to, just everyday life.
Oh, absolutely.
To business, to relationships, to anything that's a competition.
Yeah, I mean, anything where you have a goal that you're trying to achieve and you're going up against some kind of obstacle, right? I mean, that's essentially what war is. It's just a very extreme version of that. And so the principles that Sun Tzu lays out, they really can be applied to so many different things.
Yeah. So we're going to go through, the basic concepts, the 13 chapters, talk about some of the notable quotes and how it can apply to your life.
Sounds great.
All right. So let's start off with this idea of strategy over force.
Okay.
That is really I think the heart of the art of war.
Yeah.
It's not about just brute force, just going in there and trying to overpower your enemy. It's about being smarter.
Right. It's about using your mind.
Yeah.
More than your muscles, so to speak.
Right.
And so much of that comes down to planning, right? Thinking ahead.
Yeah.
Sun Tzu talks a lot about, knowing the terrain, knowing your enemy, knowing yourself. All of these things are really important for being able to develop a good strategy.
Yeah, and one of the most famous quotes from the book is, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting."
Right.
And that really gets to the heart of it. It's like, how can you win without even having to fight?
Right. And and I think, we can even see that in the modern world, right? Like there are all sorts of ways to win in business without actually going head to head with your competitors in a price war or something like that.
Right.
You can find ways to differentiate yourself. You can find ways to create value that your competitors aren't creating. And that's a way of subduing them without actually having to fight them.
Right. So, so that's really I think the main takeaway from the art of war is this idea of strategy, of planning, of thinking ahead, and really using your mind to win.
Yeah.
Now, another key concept that he talks about is knowing yourself and your enemy.
Absolutely.
And that's huge, because if you don't know yourself, if you don't know your own strengths and weaknesses, then how can you possibly hope to defeat an enemy who does know you?
Right. And even if you do know yourself, if you don't know your enemy, you're still at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what their strengths and weaknesses are. You don't know what their goals are. You don't know what they're planning.
Right.
And so Sun Tzu says, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles.
Yeah, I love that quote.
It's a good one.
It's so good.
Because it really gets to the heart of why this is so important. It's like, if you have that knowledge, then you're already ahead of the game.
Right.
It's like going into a negotiation. Right. If you know what your bottom line is and you know what the other person's bottom line is, you're in a much better position to negotiate a good deal.
Right.
Than if you just go in there blind.
Yeah.
And the same thing applies to any kind of competition.
Yeah, absolutely. And then he also talks about this idea of flexibility and adaptability.
Right.
That's so important, because the battlefield is always changing. The situation is always changing. And if you're not able to adapt, if you're not able to be flexible, then you're going to get defeated.
Right. I mean, I think that one of the best quotes from the book about this is, in the midst of chaos, there's also opportunity.
Yes.
Right. And I think that really speaks to this idea of, even when things are going wrong, even when things are not going according to plan, there's still a chance to turn things around.
Yeah.
If you're flexible, if you're adaptable, if you're able to see those opportunities and take advantage of them.
Yeah, it's about being able to change your plans, your strategy on the fly.
Absolutely.
And we see that all the time in business, right?
Yeah.
Where a company might have a plan, but then the market changes or something happens that they didn't anticipate, and they have to be able to adapt.
Absolutely.
And if they're not able to adapt, then they're going to go out of business.
Yep.
So that's really important.
Yeah, and it even applies to our own personal lives, right? Like, how many times have we had a plan for something and then something happens and we have to change our plans?
Right.
And if we're not able to do that, if we're just stuck in our ways and we're not willing to be flexible, then, we're going to miss out on opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another key concept is deception.
Oh, yeah.
Sun Tzu talks a lot about deception.
All warfare is based on deception.
Yeah.
That's what he says.
Yes, he does. He says that all warfare is based on deception. And that means everything from, making your enemy think that you're weak when you're strong,
right,
to making them think that you're going to attack in one place when you're actually going to attack in another place.
Right. It's all about misdirection.
Yeah.
Creating a false sense of security in your enemy so that they're not prepared for what you're actually going to do.
Right. And, we see that all the time in sports, right? Where a quarterback might look one way and then throw the ball the other way.
Right.
Or a basketball player might fake a shot and then drive to the basket.
Yeah.
It's all about deception. It's all about making your opponent think that you're going to do one thing when you're actually going to do something else.
Absolutely.
And it's a very effective tactic.
Yeah, because it plays on their expectations, right? If you can get inside your opponent's head, and understand how they're thinking and what they're expecting, then you can use that to your advantage,
right,
by doing something that they're not expecting.
Yeah, and then they're caught off guard.
Exactly.
They're not prepared.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about leadership and command.
Okay.
Sun Tzu talks a lot about the qualities of a good leader, of a good commander.
Yeah. He's got a whole list of them, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does.
Wisdom, sincerity, benevolence, courage, strictness.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he talks about these qualities in the context of war, but they're also very applicable to, leadership in any context.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Whether you're leading a business or a team or even just yourself, these are all important qualities to have.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that Sun Tzu really emphasizes is that a good leader is someone who inspires trust and confidence in their followers.
Yeah.
Right. And that's really important, because if you don't have the trust and confidence of your followers, then they're not going to be willing to follow you into battle or into whatever challenge you're facing.
Right.
And so, he talks about how a good leader is someone who is wise, who is sincere, who is benevolent, who is courageous, and who is strict.
Right.
And all of these qualities, I think, contribute to creating that sense of trust and confidence.
Yeah.
A wise leader is someone who is able to make good decisions, who's able to see the big picture, who's able to anticipate problems.
Right.
A sincere leader is someone who is honest and who is genuine.
Yeah.
A benevolent leader is someone who cares about their followers, who wants what's best for them.
Right.
A courageous leader is someone who is willing to take risks, who is willing to stand up for what they believe in.
Yeah.
And a strict leader is someone who is able to maintain discipline, who is able to hold their followers accountable.
Right.
And so all of these qualities, I think, are really important for a good leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, kind of along the same lines, he talks about the importance of efficiency and speed.
Right.
He says that speed is the essence of war.
Yeah.
And that's true in any kind of competition, really. If you can move faster than your opponent, if you can get things done quicker than they can, then you're going to have a big advantage.
Right, because it allows you to seize the initiative, right?
Yeah.
And it puts your opponent on the defensive.
Right.
And that's always a good position to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about some of the main concepts from the Art of War. And there's so much more that we could talk about.
Oh yeah, we could go on for hours.
Yeah, we could. But I think, we've hit on some of the most important points.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I think the main takeaway here is that, Sun Tzu's Art of War is a timeless classic.
Absolutely.
It's a book that is as relevant today as it was 2,500 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's a book that can really help you in any kind of competitive situation, whether it's in business or in relationships or in just, your own personal life.
Yeah, and even if you're not facing any kind of competition, I think it's still a valuable book to read because it teaches you a lot about human nature.
Yeah.
It teaches you a lot about how people think and how people behave under pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. So now let's talk about the 13 chapters. The book is divided into 13 chapters, and each chapter covers a different aspect of warfare.
Right.
So chapter 1 is called Laying Plans.
Okay.
And this chapter is all about the importance of planning and preparation.
Right. So Sun Tzu says that the most important thing is to calculate your moves.
Yeah.
To think ahead, to plan ahead. And he gives a lot of different factors that you need to take into account when you're planning a military campaign.
Yeah. He talks about the 5 constant factors, which are the moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, and method and discipline.
Right.
And so these are all things that you need to consider when you're planning a military campaign. And he also talks about the 7 calculations, which are, which of the 2 sovereigns is imbued with the moral law? Which of the 2 generals has most ability? With whom lie the advantages derived from heaven and earth? On which side is discipline most rigorously enforced? Which army is stronger? On which side are officers and men more highly trained? And in which army is there the greater constancy, both in reward and punishment?
Yeah, so those are all the things that you need to think about before you even go into battle.
Right.
Because if you don't have a good understanding of those things, then you're going to be at a disadvantage.
Yeah, absolutely. So chapter 2 is called Waging War.
Okay.
And this chapter is all about the costs of war and the importance of speed and efficiency.
Right.
So Sun Tzu says that no country has ever benefited from protracted warfare.
Yeah. And this is a really important point.
Yeah.
Because, war is expensive. It's costly in terms of lives. It's costly in terms of resources.
Right.
And so the longer a war going on, the more damage it's going to do.
Yeah.
To both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And so chapter 3 is called Attack by Stratagem.
Okay.
And this chapter is all about the importance of winning without fighting.
Right. So this is where we get back to that idea of subduing the enemy without fighting.
Yeah.
And Sun Tzu gives a lot of different examples of how to do this.
Yeah. He talks about the different types of attacks, like superior, inferior, and even attacks.
Right.
And he also talks about the importance of choosing your battles carefully.
Yeah, you don't want to fight a battle that you can't win.
Right.
And so, you need to be very strategic about which battles you choose to fight.
Yeah, absolutely. So chapter 4 is called Tactical Dispositions.
Okay.
And this chapter is all about the importance of positioning and defense.
Right.
So Sun Tzu says that invincibility lies in the defense, the possibility of victory in the attack.
Yeah, so what he's saying is that you're strongest when you're on the defensive.
Right.
Because you can choose your ground, you can choose when and where to fight. And so, it's always better to be on the defensive than to be on the offensive.
Yeah, absolutely. So chapter 5 is called Use of Energy.
Okay.
And this chapter is all about the importance of momentum and timing.
Right.
So Sun Tzu says that the clever combatant imposes his will on the enemy, but does not allow the enemy's will to be imposed on him.
Yeah. So what he's saying is that you need to be able to control the pace of the battle.
Right.
You need to be able to dictate the terms of the engagement.
Right.
And you need to be able to do that by using your energy efficiently.
Yeah, absolutely. So chapter 6 is called Weak Points and Strong.
Okay.
And this chapter is all about the importance of exploiting your enemy's weaknesses and protecting your own strength.
Right.
So Sun Tzu says that whoever is first in the field and awaits the coming of the enemy will be fresh for the fight. Whoever is second in the field and has to hasten to battle will arrive exhausted.
Yeah, so this is a really important concept. It's about being prepared. It's about being in the right place at the right time.
Right.
And it's about taking advantage of your enemy's weaknesses.
Yeah, absolutely. So chapter 7 is called Maneuvering.
Okay.
And this chapter is all about the importance of movement and logistics.
Right.
So Sun Tzu says that supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting.
Yeah, so this is another way of saying that you want to avoid fighting if at all possible.
Right.
And one of the ways to do that is by maneuvering your troops in such a way that you can outflank your enemy or cut off their supply lines or trap them in a vulnerable position.
Right.
And so, maneuvering is a very important part of warfare.
Yeah, absolutely. So chapter 8 is called Variation in Tactics.
Okay.
And this chapter is all about the importance of flexibility and adaptability.
Right.
So Sun Tzu says that there are not more than 5 primary colors: blue, yellow, red, white, and black. Yet in combination, they produce more hues than can ever be seen.
Yeah, so what he's saying is that there are a limited number of basic principles of warfare, but the ways in which you can apply those principles are limitless.
Right.
And so, you need to be able to adapt your tactics to the specific situation that you're facing.
Yeah, absolutely. So chapter 9 is called The Army on the March.
Okay.
And this chapter is all about the importance of discipline and morale when your army is on the move.
Right.
So Sun Tzu says that when an army is on the move, it must be careful not to camp in any place where it can be easily attacked.
Yeah, so this is all about being aware of your surroundings, being careful about where you camp, and making sure that your troops are well disciplined and well motivated.
Right.
Because if your troops are not well disciplined and well motivated, then they're going to be easy targets for the enemy.
Yeah, absolutely. So chapter 10 is called Terrain.
Okay.
And this chapter is all about the importance of understanding the terrain and using it to your advantage.
Right.
So Sun Tzu says that ground may be classified according to its nature as accessible, entrapping, indecisive, constricted, precipitous, and distant.
Yeah, so he's basically saying that there are different types of terrain, and each type of terrain has its own advantages and disadvantages.
Right.
And so you need to be able to understand the terrain and use it to your advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. So chapter 11 is called The 9 Situations.
Okay.
And this chapter is all about the different types of battlefield situations that you might encounter and how to adapt your tactics to each situation.
Right.
So Sun Tzu says that the art of war recognizes 9 varieties of ground: 1, dispersive ground; 2, facile ground; 3, contentious ground; 4, open ground; 5, ground of intersecting highways; 6, serious ground; 7, difficult ground; 8, hemmed-in ground; 9, desperate ground.
Yeah, so these are all different types of battlefield situations, and each situation requires a different approach.
Right.
And so you need to be able to assess the situation and adapt your tactics accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. So chapter 12 is called The Attack by Fire.
Okay.
And this chapter is all about the use of fire as a weapon.
Right.
So Sun Tzu says that there are 5 ways of attacking with fire. 1, to burn soldiers in their camp; 2, to burn stores; 3, to burn baggage trains; 4, to burn arsenals and magazines; 5, to hurl dropping fire amongst the enemy.
Yeah, so fire can be a very effective weapon, but it's also a very dangerous weapon.
Right.
And so you need to be very careful when you're using fire, and you need to make sure that you're using it in a way that will benefit you and not harm you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so chapter 13 is called The Use of Spies.
Okay.
And this chapter is all about the importance of intelligence gathering. So Sun Tzu says that raising a host of 100,000 men and marching them great distances entails heavy loss on the people and a drain on the resources of the state. The daily expenditure will amount to 1,000 ounces of silver. There will be commotion at home and abroad, and men will drop down exhausted on the highways. As many as 700,000 families will be impeded in their labor.
So what he's saying is that war is a very costly undertaking, and so you need to make sure that you have good intelligence before you go to war, because if you don't, then you're just going to be wasting your resources and putting your people at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a brief overview of the 13 chapters of The Art of War.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that's really interesting about the book is that it's not just a military manual.
Right.
It's also a philosophy of life.
Yeah.
And so, even if you're not interested in warfare, I think there's still a lot that you can learn from The Art of War.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've talked about the main concepts. We've talked about the 13 chapters. Let's talk about some of the notable quotes from the book.
Okay.
So, the most famous quotes is, as we said, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting.
Right.
And I think that's really the essence of The Art of War.
Yeah.
It's about being smarter than your opponent. It's about outmaneuvering them. It's about finding ways to win without having to resort to violence.
Absolutely.
Another famous quote is, all warfare is based on deception.
Right.
And that's that's true in any kind of competition, really.
Mhm.
If you can deceive your opponent, if you can make them think that you're doing one thing when you're actually doing something else, then you're going to have a big advantage.
Right.
Um, Another quote that I really like is, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles.
Yeah, that's a classic.
Yeah.
Because it really emphasizes the importance of knowing your opponent, and knowing yourself.
Yeah.
Because if you know both of those things, then you're in a much better position to win.
Right.
Another quote that's really relevant to today's world is, victorious warriors win first and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first and then seek to win.
Yes.
Right, and I think that's so true in business.
Yeah.
The companies that are successful are the companies that plan ahead, they do their research, they know their market, they know their customers,
Right.
and then they go out and they execute their plan.
Right.
The companies that fail are the companies that just rush into things without thinking, without planning, without doing their research.
Right.
And so, that's a really important lesson to learn from The Art of War.
Yeah, absolutely. Another quote that I really like is, in the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity.
That's a good one.
Because it reminds us that, even when things are tough, even when things are going wrong, there's always a chance to turn things around.
Right.
And that's really important to remember, when you're facing challenges in your life.
Absolutely.
Another quote that's really relevant to leadership is, appear weak when you are strong and strong when you are weak.
Right.
And that's all about deception, right?
Mhm.
It's about making your opponent think that you're something that you're not.
Right.
And that can be a very effective tactic.
Yeah.
Another quote that I really like is, he will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Because it's not always about fighting.
Right.
Sometimes it's about knowing when to walk away.
Right.
And sometimes it's about knowing when to pick your battles.
Yeah, you don't want to fight every battle.
Right.
You want to pick the battles that you know you can win.
Right.
And you want to avoid the battles that you know you're going to lose.
Right.
And so, that's a really important lesson to learn from The Art of War.
Yeah, absolutely. Another quote that I really like is, the greatest victory is that which requires no battle.
Yeah, that's the ultimate goal, right?
Yeah.
To be able to win without even having to fight.
Right.
And that's what Sun Tzu's all about. He's all about finding ways to win without having to resort to violence.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one last quote that I want to mention is, opportunities multiply as they are seized.
Yeah, that's a good word.
Because it reminds us that we need to be proactive, we need to be willing to take risks, and we need to be willing to seize opportunities when they present themselves.
Right, because if you wait for the perfect opportunity, it's never going to come.
Right.
You need to be willing to take action and to seize the opportunities that are in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, those are just a few of the many notable quotes from The Art of War.
Yeah, there are so many good ones.
Yeah, there are. And so, I think the best way to really appreciate the wisdom of The Art of War is to read the book yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I encourage you to do that. And if you enjoy this deep dive, please consider supporting the author by purchasing the book. There's a link in the description below where you can do that. And that's it for today's deep dive.
This has been a deep dive from BookCast FM, bringing books to life one cast at a time.
And, as you go out into the world today, I want you to think about this.
Mm-hmm.
Are you approaching your challenges with strategic foresight and a deep understanding of the playing field? Or are you just relying on brute force?
That's a good question to ask yourself.